Hello and welcome to my week in learning log. My name is Brandon Stone and this is a project for Business 620, a class in the Colorado State University College of Business. As part of my MBA program, I've been tasked with bringing to life some of the leadership principles we've learned throughout the semester. And as you can probably guess from that intro video, I'm going to be using Game of Thrones to help me do just that. It's one of my favorite TV shows and book series, and there are lots of leadership styles on display, so I think it lends itself really nicely to this project. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started with week one of our course. The first leadership principle I've chosen is called the trait theory of leadership. Basically, this theory suggests that there are certain character traits that predispose some people to be natural leaders. These traits could be intelligence, confidence, extroversion, anything that might make them suitable to a leadership position. So in this video clip, and I hope you've seen this show because there will be spoilers obviously, but the king has died and his younger brother will be taking his place, and before he does, he's about to receive some advice from his grandfather.
Your brother is dead. Do you know what that means? I'm not trying to trick you.
It means I'll become king.
Yes, you will become king. What kind of king do you think you'll be?
A good king?
I think so as well. You've got the right temperament for it. But what makes a good king? What is a good king's single most important quality?
This is hardly the place or the time.
Holiness?
Baelor the Blessed was holy and pious. He built this sept. He also named a 6-year-old boy High Septon because he thought the boy could work miracles. He ended up fasting himself into an early grave because food was of this world and this world was sinful.
Justice?
Yeah. Good king must be just. Horus I was just. Everyone applauded his reforms, nobles and commoners alike, but he wasn't just for long. He was murdered in his sleep after less than a year by his own brother. Was that truly just of him, to abandon his subjects to an evil that he was too gullible to recognize?
No.
No.
What about strength?
Yes, strength. King Robert was strong. He won the rebellion and crushed the Targaryen dynasty. And he attended 3 small council meetings in 17 years. He spent his time whoring and hunting and drinking until the last 2 killed him. So, we have a man who starves himself to death, a man who lets his own brother murder him, and a man who thinks that winning and ruling are the same thing. What do they all lack?
Wisdom.
Yes.
Wisdom is what makes a good king.
Yes. But what is wisdom? A house with great wealth and fertile lands asks you for your protection against another house with a strong navy that could one day oppose you. How do you know which choice is wise and which isn't? Any experience of treasuries and granaries or shipyards and soldiers? No, of course not. A wise king knows what he knows and what he doesn't. You're young. A wise young king listens to his counselors and heeds their advice until he comes of age. And the wisest kings continue to listen to them long afterwards. Your brother was not a wise king. Your brother was not a good king. If he had been, perhaps he'd still be alive.
All right, so in that scene, Tywin, the grandfather, he's really just trying to position himself as the chief advisor to the young king, but despite his motives, I think he gives some pretty sound advice, and they do touch on some of those traits that could make for a good leader. So not all the clips will be that long, so this won't take forever. I just love that scene so much, so I had to include it. The next concept I chose to put in here is the distinction between good leadership and great leadership. One of my favorite things I'm going to take away from this class. It would be really easy to think that great leadership is just even better than good leadership, but in this context, they actually aren't even on the same continuum. So when we say good leadership, we're referring to a value judgment. So I think it's helpful to think of the opposite of good as evil. And then when we talk about great leadership, this is a measure of power or magnitude. So the opposite of great would be weak then. So with those two definitions in mind, I thought a visual representation would be the most useful here. So we have a chart with good leadership on the y-axis and great leadership on the x-axis. And we can see Ned Stark up there in the top left, a very good man. He's honorable and trustworthy, a loving father and husband, but to be honest, a pretty weak ruler. And then the names in the bottom right there are all very powerful, very great rulers, but not necessarily good people. So the best leaders are the ones in the top right corner, the ones who are powerful rulers and deserving of the love and respect of their people. And so now we have one more leadership concept from the first of our 7 weeks of class, and this one is about the distinction between positional power and personal power. So I will play the clip first before we discuss it further, but what you need to know is that Daenerys has just bought herself an army made up of slaves, and to signify the sale, she's been given a whip, which means that the army is hers, and the slave soldiers must obey her commands. So let's see what happens. All right, man, that scene gives me chills every time. So her throwing the whip in the dirt is the perfect transition from positional power to personal power. Positional power would have been keeping the whip and her army would have been obedient because they had no other choice. But by dropping that whip in the dirt, she's giving them the choice of whether or not they want to follow her. And that is the definition of personal power, a leader whose people choose to follow them because they believe in him or her, not because they're forced to. All right, moving on to week 2 of our course, and we get into consideration versus structure, two opposite ends of a leadership style continuum. So a leader that is committed to structure believes in a high level of organization, assigning responsibilities, creating schedules, prioritizing the work that needs to be done. And on the other hand, a leader that is more about consideration prioritizes their relationship with their people. They believe if they create camaraderie and trust and respect among their people, then the work will get done. And since this is a continuum, I thought another visual would be the best way to represent this one. So on the left, you have leaders like Ned and Renly, who are people-first type leaders. And on the right, you have Stannis and Tywin, two of the most business-first relationships later type of leaders in all of Game of Thrones. So now we get on to an age-old leadership concept of leading by example. It was tough to find a clip from the show that was short enough to use, but I like the one I ended up with. In this scene, Ned's men have captured a deserter from the Night's Watch, for which the punishment is death. And to teach his sons, particularly Bran, the youngest, he brings them along for the execution.
In the name of Robert of the House Baratheon, the first of his name.
Don't look away.
King of the Andals and the first...
Father will know if you do.
Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm. I, Eddard, of the House Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, sentence you to die. You understand why I did it?
John said he was a deserter.
But do you understand why I had to kill him?
Our way is the old way.
The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword.
All right, so that last line there was really the key. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. It would have been really easy for Ned to order his men to carry out the execution someplace else. He didn't even need to be there. But that lesson of taking responsibility for your responsibilities, there's nothing more Ned than that. And even though it was grim, this was a great teaching moment and an opportunity for him to lead by example. So next up is something called the path goal theory. This is basically the idea that for any given goal, a leader must be able to choose the right path to get there. And in this scene, Daenerys is hell-bent on destruction, and Tyrion is going to do his best to change her mind.
Shall we begin?
Do we have a plan?
I will crucify the masters. I will set their fleets afire, kill every last one of their soldiers, and return their cities to the dirt. That is my plan. You don't approve.
You once told me you knew what your father was. Did you know his plans for King's Landing when the Lannister armies were at his gates? Probably not. Well, he told my brother, and Jaime told me. He had caches of wildfire hidden under the Red Keep, the guild halls, the Scepter Baler, all the major thoroughfares. He would have burned every one of his citizens, the loyal ones and the traitors, every man, woman, and child. That's why Jaime killed him.
This is entirely different.
You're talking about destroying cities. It's not entirely different. I'd like to suggest an alternate approach.
All right, so she was planning on violence and destruction, and he was able to convince her that diplomacy was the way to go. And I won't get into how it all played out on the show, but regardless, a leader has to be able to make that decision to achieve their goals. So next up is something that's often called the 10th man principle, although I'll call it the 10th person. This is the idea that a ruler must be willing to consider the dissenting voice even when it's easier to side with the majority. So in this scene that I've chosen, Jon Snow has just returned from scouting the wildling army, and he's trying to warn the leaders of the Night's Watch of what's coming for them.
Mance's army was closing in on Craster's Keep when we left. We saw their campfires from Osric's Hill. They'll reach the wall before the next full moon.
Surprised you didn't ride over and say hello. The king beyond the wall is your old friend, isn't he?
We need to prepare.
We've been preparing.
We should seal the tunnel. Plug it with rocks and ice, flood it and let it freeze.
And how would we range north?
We wouldn't.
Coward! You would cut off our legs, pluck out our eyes, leave us cowering behind the wall, hoping for the storm to pass.
We can't defend the gate against 100,000 men.
This castle has stood for thousands of years. The Night's Watch has defended her for thousands of years. And in all those centuries, we have never sealed the tunnel.
Have you ever seen a giant, Sir Alistair? I have. The tunnel's gate won't stop them.
The bars on those gates are 4 inches thick, cold-rolled steel.
And they won't stop them.
Remind me which order you belong to, Lord Snow.
The stewards.
Are the stewards responsible for maintaining the tunnel?
No.
Who would that be?
The builders.
The builders. First builder, Yarwick. Lord Snow here recommends sealing the tunnel, leaving us unable to carry out our duties as sworn brothers of the Night's Watch. Do you agree with him?
No.
Given your deep knowledge of the wildling army, Lord Snow, you and Tarly will take night duties atop the wall until the full moon.
So out of everybody in that room, Jon is the only one that has seen the enemy's army. But he's a lone voice, not only at the time, but sealing the tunnel goes against thousands of years of tradition. So Sir Alistair and the other leaders discount his advice, and they would later come to regret it. There's also a great example of this 10th man or 10th person principle in the movie World War Z, but we'll stick to Game of Thrones for now. And my next concept on my list is known as shared leadership. This is the idea that a good leader puts accomplishing the mission ahead of their personal glory, and this means that the needs of the mission come first, even if that means appearing to take a backseat a little bit. So in this scene, we're going to see Jon Snow recovering with Daenerys after a battle that did not go well, and he's a king in his own right, but he knows that he and his people need Daenerys and her armies if they're going to survive.
We are going to destroy the Night King and his army. We'll do it together. You have my word.
Thank you, Danny.
Danny.
Who was the last person who called me that? I'm not sure. Was it my brother? Not the company you want to keep.
All right. Not Danny. How about my queen? I'd bend the knee, but
What about those who swore allegiance to you?
they'll all come to see you for what you are.
All right, so we see there John making a really tough decision. He's been made king by his northern followers, and they don't want to follow anyone but him, but he knows they have no chance of surviving without Dany and her armies, so he puts his pride aside and swears his fealty to her, and he knows it's not what he promised his people, but he's willing to put the mission above all else, which is shared leadership. So the next leadership principle will be another Jon Snow clip. I almost used him for all 21 of these, but I didn't want to bore you too much, but this time we're going to see how a good leader knows the importance of making sure your team is equipped for success. So in this case, he knows they're going to need to make a ton of weapons out of dragon glass, which is something that they don't have.
This message was sent to me by Samwell Tarly. He was my brother at the Night's Watch. A man I trust as much as anyone in this world. He's discovered proof that Dragonstone sits on a mountain of dragonglass. I received this a few days ago from Dragonstone. It was sent to me by Tyrion Lannister. He is now Hand of the Queen to Daenerys Targaryen. She intends to take the Iron Throne from Cersei Lannister. She has a powerful army at her back, and if this message is to be believed, 3 dragons. Lord Tyrion has invited me to Dragonstone to meet with Daenerys. And I'm going to accept. We need this dragonglass, my lord. We know that dragonglass can destroy both White Walkers and their army. We need to mine it and turn it into weapons.
So there it is. Jon's willing to risk all the political capital he has to make sure his people are well equipped. It could easily have cost him everything, but he knows they need that dragonglass, so he'll do whatever it takes to get it. So moving on now to week 4 of our class, this next concept is known as the Slay the Dragon Principle, appropriate for Game of Thrones. It gets its name from stories where the king offers a handsome reward to anyone who goes and kills the evil dragon, and the idea is that nobody's going to be willing to risk their life trying to kill a dragon unless they truly believe the king will make good on his promise. So the next clip takes place in Renly Baratheon's camp. He's organized a tournament and offered a prize to the winner, so let's see what happens.
I yield.
Well fought. Approach. Rise. Remove your helm. All your father promised and more, my lady. I've seen Sir Loras bested once or twice, but never quite in that fashion.
No, no, my love. My brother fought valiantly for you.
That he did, my queen. But there can only be one champion. Brienne of Tarth. You may ask anything of me you desire. It is within my power. It is yours.
Your Grace, I ask the honor of a place in your Kingsguard. I will be one of your 7, pledge my life to yours, and keep you safe from all harm.
Done. Rise, Brienne of the Kingsguard.
All right. Alright, so Brienne wins the tournament and asks to be part of Renly's Kingsguard, and he accepts. And obviously she wasn't fighting a dragon, her life probably wasn't in danger in the tournament, but the principle still holds true. If he had denied her request, he would have lost all credibility with his people, so good on Renly for holding up his end of the bargain there. And for this next one, we're going to go back to Jon Snow to talk about task identity. This is the idea that good leaders can nurture a sense of pride and ownership among their people regarding the task they've been given. This way the followers can develop intrinsic motivation rather than simply working to avoid being punished. This scene takes place during the wildling attack on Castle Black, and Jon has an important mission for his friend Gren.
The outer gate won't hold. Take 5 men. Hold the inner gate. Hold the gate. If they make it through.
They won't. Come on, Hill! And you, Cooper! You 3, on me! Come on, you lazy bastard!
Alright, so that was a quick little scene, but I think it illustrates task identity pretty well. Jon could have just said, hey, go see if you can hold the gate, but instead he grabs him and looks him in the eye and tells him how important the task is, and that makes all the difference. We can see it in how determined Gren becomes right away. So we'll see more from him and his 5 brothers in a little while, but first I want to take a look at another big topic from our course, which is transformational leadership. So this is similar to the idea of positional versus personal power that we looked at earlier. Some leaders can only motivate by the threat of punishment or the promise of reward, which is purely transactional, but a transformational leader can motivate their followers due to their admiration or pride or belief in the leader. So again, this is a tough one to illustrate with just one little scene, so I thought I'd use another visual to compare a few different leaders. So on the left there, you see some transactional leaders. Their style is to say, you're going to get the job done whether you like it or not, basically. And on the right, you have the more transformational leaders who inspire people to follow them voluntarily. All right, so moving on into week 5 of our course, and a leadership principle, one of the ones I've been most looking forward to, which is motivational language theory. And there are so many great speeches in Game of Thrones, but I think this one fits the bill.
I'll lead the attack.
I'll lead the attack!
Forward my helmet. Sir Mandon, you will bear the king's banner.
Men, form up! Men! Men! They say I am half a man. But what does that make the lot of you?
The only way out is through the gates. And they're at the gates.
There's another way out. I'm going to show you. Come out behind them and their asses. Don't fight for your king. And don't fight for his kingdoms. Don't fight for honor. Don't fight for glory. Don't fight for riches because you won't get any. This is your city Stannis means to sack. That's your gate he's ramming. If he gets in, it will be your houses he burns. Your gold he steals. Your women he will rape. Those are brave men knocking at our door. Let's go kill them!
Man, this show is so good. I love that speech by Tyrion there. So there are 3 main components to the actual motivational language theory that we studied in class. One part is the actual direction giving. So in this case, it's Tyrion saying we're going to sneak out behind him and kill him. That's kind of their mission. And then the second is showing empathy with the followers, which he does by acknowledging that they're not going to be rewarded for this, but it needs to be done anyway. And then the third part is to provide context or meaning, which he does in spades, talking about what happens if the enemy breaks through. So all in all, quite a speech from Tyrion there. And now let's go back up north to Castle Black to take a look at an idea called culture as current. This idea uses the flow of the current of a river as a metaphor for the culture of an organization. Basically, effective leaders can create a culture that flows as strong as a river to keep things kind of moving in the right direction. So let's see what happens when Gren and his brothers go beneath the wall to hold their gate, like Jon asked.
How are we going to stop that? Shot 20 arrows in him already. You heard Jon, we hold the gate. Jon Snow's not Lord Commander. We hold the gate!
forsake me. Far forsake me.
The gods are down here. It's the six of us, you hear me?
No, please.
Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my death. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die by my post. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. I place my life and honor in the night's watch. For this night and all the nights to come.
Wow, tell me you're not fired up right now. So we see there that they're rightfully terrified with a giant bearing down on them, but the thing that steadies their resolve is reciting the vows that they take when they're sworn in as brothers of the Night's Watch. So great leadership by Gren to invoke those vows, but also great leadership by John and all the other leaders in the Night's Watch's history to create an organization that has such a strong culture that it inspires its members to go above and beyond. All right, so let's take it down a notch or two after those last couple fiery clips, and this time we're going to look at an idea known as the romance of leadership. So this is the idea that the success or failure of an organization is often overly attributed to just their leader. So what you need to know here is that King Robert had ordered Daenerys, at the time a young girl, to be murdered. And Ned had resisted, but much like the 10th person principle, he was the only one, so Robert ignored his objections, and now, with Robert on his deathbed, he can reflect back on that decision.
The girl. Daenerys. You were right. Varys, Littlefinger, my brother, worthless. No one to tell me no but you. Only you.
So we see there Robert acknowledging that his old friend Ned was right, and he says all his other advisors were useless for not having the courage to stand up to the king when he was wrong, but it's not just on the advisors, it's up to a leader to create a culture where their advisors feel safe voicing those objections. So, alright, that was a pretty quick one, so we're on to week 6 of our course now, and this next idea is called skills-based leadership. So earlier we looked at trait theory, which said that leaders are born with characteristics that predispose them to leadership. Skills-based leadership suggests that the skills that make a good leader are things that can be learned and developed. So the example we'll look at here is when Theon Greyjoy goes home to propose an alliance with the Starks to his father Balon, and Theon thinks that being the only living male heir means that he's the natural choice to lead their military, but Balon has other ideas.
I see. I destroy Robb Stark's enemies for him, and he will make me king of the Iron Islands once again.
I will lead the attack myself.
Oh, you will?
I'm your son, your only living heir. Who else? Told you to wait outside. How did you get past the guards?
Anything with a cock is easy to fool.
My dear.
Yara?
So good to see you, brother. This is a homecoming I'll tell my grandchildren about.
She can't lead an attack.
And why not?
You're a woman!
You're the one in skirts.
This isn't Winterfell, boy. Your sister took over command of your eldest brother's ship after your new father killed him. What's dead may never die.
Dead may never die.
The only nights she spent off this islands have been spent on the sea. She's commanded men. She's killed men. She knows who she is. No man gives me a crown. I pay the iron price.
All right, so everything you need to know about Balon Greyjoy right there, just a wonderful man. But yeah, so Theon thought he could just waltz in and claim his birthright at the head of the Iron Fleet, and Balon said, actually no, it's your sister who's been sailing and fighting and leading for years, so it's her job. And obviously there's a lot of history and context building up to that scene that I won't get into, but the skills-based leadership theory holds here that Yara has the skill set, which makes her the right choice to lead. So, all right, moving on to something known as the Mezzanine Principle, which gets its name from leaders who tend to stand up in high places looking down on their people. So in this scene, we'll see King Joffrey and Lady Margaery being carried through the slums of King's Landing, and we'll see how the two of them respond to being amongst the common people.
Why have we stopped?
It's Lady Marjorie, Your Grace.
What is she doing? Who gave her permission?
My lady. We should have guards, my lady. Why? Pardon me. Stop, my lady. You'll ruin your dress.
I have others.
Would you like to speak with her, Your Grace?
No.
He was a soldier. He went to fight on the walls when the ships came to Blackwater Bay.
All right, so we see a couple of very different types of leaders there. Joffrey isn't even comfortable being seen by his people, much less getting out and joining them, while Marjorie, on the other hand, hops right out and goes to visit an orphanage. And sure, maybe her motives weren't entirely altruistic, but that's not really the point here. She's willing to spend time with the people she's ruling to hear their stories, and Joffrey is not. All right, so on to another concept that I really like thinking about, which is the Roman roads principle, and I think it gets its name from the days when Rome was the epicenter of the Western world, and you could never really be lost because you could take any road and they would all lead you back to Rome eventually. So the lesson for leaders here is that even if you have a singular goal in mind, there are countless ways to pursue that objective, and a good leader needs to be able to choose the right path, yes, but also be flexible enough to realize that there are lots of paths that can get you there, and nobody in Game of Thrones embodies this concept better than Littlefinger, Peter Baelish. It would take hours to talk about the ins and outs and all the maneuvers he makes with his one goal in mind, but in this scene what you need to know is that he wants to use the Knights of the Vale, so he comes to visit Lord Royce, their commander, who is fostering the young Lord of the Vale, Robin Arryn.
A falcon!
A gerfalcon. The greatest and rarest of birds.
Last time I saw you, Baelish, you told me you were taking Sansa Stark home with you to the Fingers.
Indeed I was.
And yet, not long ago, we received reports that she has been married to Ramsay Bolton in Winterfell.
On our way to the Fingers, we were set upon by a large force of Bolton men. Seemed to know exactly when we were traveling and exactly whom we were transporting.
Do you take me for a fool?
Tell me, Lord Royce, how many people knew of my travel plans with Sansa Stark? I shared my intentions with you, and no one else.
Slander a man in his own home. You might find yourself crossing swords with him.
Your home is the Vale. The Lord of the Vale stands before us, and only his judgment concerns me.
Should we throw him through the moon door?
My lord, I have always been faithful to House Arryn. To your father, to your mother, and now to you.
Do you believe him, Uncle Peter?
Lord Royce has served the Vale well. He's enjoyed a distinguished military career. If we could trust his absolute loyalty, he would make a capable commander in the wars to come.
You can trust my absolute loyalty, my lord.
I think he deserves one more chance. What do you say?
Fine.
All right, so Littlefinger for you. He could have just asked Lord Royce to send the Knights of the Vale on the mission he had in mind, but instead he orchestrates this entire elaborate situation, gifting Robin the Falcon, reestablishing his place in the Young Lord's in-group, and accusing Lord Royce of something he had nothing to do with. And after this scene, he has Lord Royce in his pocket, and the Knights of the Vale are his to command, so lots of different ways to achieve an objective there. And all right, moving on to our last week of class here, this next concept is known as the elephant and rider principle. Basically, it says that our emotional brain is like an elephant and our rational brain is the human rider. So As long as we keep our emotions under control, our rational brain stays in charge. Just like if an elephant stays calm, a human rider can steer that elephant. But if an elephant panics and starts running around, there's no way a human rider is going to be able to control it. So that's just like when our emotions start to run wild, it's very difficult for our rational brain to regain control. And in this scene, Jon is now Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and he's speaking with Tormund, a captive, but someone Jon sees as a potential leader of the wildlings. And we'll see how this conversation is emotional and even adversarial at first, but then things change.
And if you go north of the wall, gather the remaining free folk wherever they are, and bring them back here. I'll open the gates for them and let them through. I'll find them lands to settle south of the wall.
They won't kneel for you, and neither will I.
I don't want them to kneel for me. I want them to fight with me when the time comes.
The day I ask my people to fight with the crows is the day my people cut my guts from my belly and make me eat them.
And how many of your people can't fight? The women, the children, the old, the sick, what happens to them? You're condemning them to death. Worse than death, because you're too proud to make peace. Or maybe you're not proud. Maybe you're just a coward.
Easy thing to say to a man in chains.
Your people need a leader, and they need to get south of the wall before it's too late. We don't have much time, and they have less. The walkers are coming, and they'll hit your people first. I'm not asking you to make peace to save your skin. Make peace to save your people.
Alright, so that scene I think illustrates the elephant and rider principle pretty well. I don't think either of the elephants were really totally out of control, but it was a pretty emotionally charged conversation at first. And once Jon took the chains off of Tormund, Tormund was able to calm down a bit and think rationally, and they were eventually able to find a way to work together. So, alright, next up, I love the name of this one. It's the stupid leader principle, and the idea here is that a leader doesn't necessarily need to be intelligent to be effective, but the catch is that if a leader isn't particularly intelligent, they do need to have a high degree of humility so that they are willing to take the advice of people who are intelligent, just like Tywin was telling Tommen in our very first clip about trait theory. So this is a chart that we had in class. The light gray line on top shows that being humble does help leaders who are intelligent to some degree, but the darker line shows that humility really makes a huge difference in effectiveness for leaders who aren't very intelligent themselves. And here's a little graph I made, bear with me. I had intelligence on the y-axis and humility on the x-axis. So that would mean the further to the top right corner, the more effective a leader is. To try to make that a vertical line, I rotated the whole thing 45 degrees. So now you have the two attributes on the diagonals, and the closer to the top of the chart, the more effective the leader. So Ned on the right there, not the sharpest tool in the shed, but extremely humble and a moderately effective leader. Tywin and Stannis on the left, quite intelligent in their own right, but not very humble, and again, moderately successful. And poor old Walder Frey at the bottom, not intelligent, not humble, not a very good leader. I have Jon closest to the top in this one. He was reasonably intelligent, but very humble, and the combination made him a great leader. So, alright, we've made it to our very last leadership principle, the authenticity paradox. This one says that good leaders are authentic and true to themselves, but what happens when your natural personality isn't what the mission calls for? So how do you adapt to provide the leadership your people need without sacrificing who you are and what you believe in? In this clip we're about to see, Daenerys has just laid out her war plans, which involve laying siege to the capital rather than attacking it directly, and Lady Olenna rightly suspects that this is more Tyrion's plan, and she has some advice for the young queen.
But I swear to you, she will pay for what she's done. And we will bring peace back to Westeros.
Peace. Do you think that's what we had under your father? Or his father? Or his? Peace never lasts, my dear. Will you take a bit of advice from an old woman? He's a clever man, your hand. I've known a great many clever men. I've outlived them all. You know why? I ignored them. The lords of Westeros are sheep. Are you a sheep? No. You're a dragon. Be a dragon.
All right, so there it is, our very last clip. Spoiler alert, Daenerys would end up taking this advice very much to heart, and it didn't exactly go well for anybody involved. So that's it. That's my week in learning log. Thanks for sticking with me through all 21 of these. And remember, when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.